Hi everyone and welcome to your next session admin course with Plato training, where today we're going to be looking at communication in business administration. Your aims and objectives of today's session are to compare communication methods and know when to use them, know how to overcome barriers, to identify positive and negative spoken language, and to understand tone of voice, body language, speaking clearly can impact communication. So here on the screen we can see 5 different methods of communication. You should be familiar with all of these. So first we have email, next is letter, then telephone call, face-to-face communication, and finally text message. You're going to be working with these different types of communication for your first question. So on this page and the next page I have some information about all 5 of those methods, so please do pause this video so that you've got some information to read yourselves about each method of communication. So, bearing in mind 5 different methods of communication, I would now like you to think about working through the scenario for question 1. So you've been asked to communicate a staff at a rock climbing centre. Your role is to ensure that all the staff members have responded to state whether they would like to come or not. You're at the rock climbing centre to book the event. Through the scenario, you must describe 3 different methods of communication. So the methods cannot be repeated. You can only use the method once. So my advice is, before you decide on a method for the first part of the scenario, make sure you've read all 3 parts before you make a concrete decision and start writing about it. Because if you use the same method twice, you're going to have this question. Another rule to this question is you need to make sure that you have at least one method of verbal communication and at least one method of written. So, you need to describe 3 different methods of communication. One must be written, be verbal, and they all have to be different to one another. So, the first part of the question to look at is details of the event and how to secure or decline a place. What is the best method of communicating this and why? The second part of the question says you've only been contacted by 5 out of 20 people regarding the deadline is in 2 days' time. Your manager needs you to find out the exact figures. What is the best communicating this and why? The final part of the question says you've now received 17 confirmations to come to the rock climbing centre and you need to book the event. What is the best method of communicating this and why? Barriers to communication. So some people could have barriers to communication. Examples on the screen here. People may use English as a second or additional language. So their understanding of English may be either limited or some people may have a hearing impairment, they could be deaf. Some people may have a visual impairment, they could be blind. People can be non-verbal, where they either choose to be a mute or they could be through a disability. Some people can have learning disabilities like autism or Down syndrome. Some people may just have a lack of clarity or knowledge around what you're trying to say to them, and therefore that in itself can become a barrier because it can become very difficult with that customer. So how will we overcome the barriers? So you're going to amend how you communicate with people. We cannot treat everybody the same. We looked at equality last week, where it states that you must make reasonable adjustments, and that coincides with communication, because making a reasonable adjustment, amending the way that you communicate, is going to help that person to understand back with you. It's also going to help if you understand the barrier that they have, what adjustment to make. Be flexible in your approach. Just because something works for one person who has a hearing impairment doesn't mean it will work for another person with a hearing impairment. I have some scenarios on the next few pages. So if you attended today's live session, you will have already looked at these scenarios. So past these, if you already looked at those on the live with me. If you did not look at them on the live, I would like you to work through them. For question 2, you're going to describe 3 of communicating with customers using some new scenarios that we haven't yet looked at. Once again, we need to use 3 different methods of communication, and at least one example will be verbal. Let's have a look at these scenarios that you're going to be answering. So, a female customer enters the reception area of the business and takes a seat. It's company policy that the lady signs. When you ask her to come and help, she ignores you. You notice that she's got hearing aids in her ears. So how could staff at the office communicate with the female customer? How could this help the female customer? So just like in question 1, you have to use 3 different methods. So before you decide entirely on a method for this one, let's have a look at the next 2. Male customer has complained about poor service. He's shouting down the phone and is repeatedly asking to speak to your manager. But your manager is out of the office, but you cannot. The man will not allow you to speak. What would you do? So how could you communicate in the office with this male customer? How could you help? How could this help the male customer? What would you do? A third example before you answer. The third scenario says a young lady comes to the office reception area and speaks in another language. You ask if she understands, but she continues to speak in her own language. So how could you communicate with this young lady? How could your communication method help this young lady? Now just remember, when you're answering question 2, you need to have at least one written, and it must be verbal. And remember that all 3 methods need to be different to one another. Please pause this video whilst you. Positive and negative language. So, positive and negative language question is really easy. However, it's a question that people sometimes get mixed up on because it is basic, and I think some people basicness of it. Talking about positive and negative language, we're not talking about how we look or how we sound. We are literally talking about the words that are coming out of our mouths. Positive language could be hello, whereas negative language could be what do you want? Positive language, how can I help you today? Versus negative language of I'm busy. you to look at some extra examples for yourself. Please remember that you have to use the exact quotation of positive and negative language. Look there, have a good day. You could have examples such as go away, leave me alone. There's lots of different ones, but just remember it's got to be the actual verbal phrase. You don't need to explain it in language because it's not there to be the verbal phrase. So please give me at least 2 examples of positive and 2 examples of negative, but use some that I haven't mentioned. Please watch to complete the question. I have a video for you to watch on speaking clearly. I've put a link in which is down below, so if you turn your device from full screen, if you've got it on full screen, screen off, and the description of the video, you should see a link in there where I've put speaking clearly and the link to the video. You can pause this and watch that one. So speaking clearly, we should now have a better understanding of what it is about from watching the video. Clearly is about having a positive tone of voice. It's about using the correct volume because you don't want to be very negative, very low. You don't want to be too loud or too quiet in your volume. You need to use the correct language, so no swearing, I'm not of that one. And we don't want to use jargon or abbreviations, so you don't want to say to customers, I'm just going to get the TPC from the NMP. It's going to mean anything to your customers. By speaking clearly, it's going to help the customers to understand you. It's going to prevent complaints, or limited misinterpretation, and it will help you to communicate accurate information. So I would like you to describe how staff can communicate with different customers using different methods and different behaviours. And this part of the question we're looking at speaking clearly, where you've got 2 different parts to have a look at. So firstly, we should speak clearly, and secondly, you're going to describe how speaking clearly can improve communication with customers. Remember to check your verbs. I've put your guidance on the question of this video as you complete that question. Another video here for tone of voice. Once again, if you're screen mode, please take yourself off full screen mode, go to the description box and you should see the link for the video tone of voice. This video, I want you to go and watch tone of voice. So now that you've watched the video on tone of voice, you should understand that a voice is having a varied pitch, so not talking really monotone. The volume should be soft, so you don't want to be too loud or too quiet. You also don't want to speak too fast or too... Tone of voice is having a monotone pitch, talking really low. It can be hard to hear, too slow, or speaking too fast. If you have a good tone of voice, a positive tone of, you're not bored. It shows that you're not, that you are interested. It shows that you're worth listening to. To concentrate if something really monotone and it's hard to hear them, or they're speaking really slow. And it may come sort of with trust as well, because you may be seen or deemed as being more trustworthy if you're speaking with a positive tone of voice, because professionalism to your tone of voice as well. So question 5, same question as question. This time we're looking at tone of. I would like you to describe the different tones of voice that staff could use when they're communicating with customers. And I'd like you to describe why the tone of voice is important to customers. Remember to check your verbs, and I've put the guidance underneath each part of the questions. Please pause this video whilst you complete. Once again, another video for you. I just think it's easier with videos. I know I'm being with the way that I'm speaking, but I'm not on camera, so this one is obviously more important because you can't see me acting out negative and positive body language. Once again, if you're on full screen mode, please please turn off your full screen mode and scroll down to the description bar where you'll see a video called body language. Please pause this video whilst you go off and watch this one. So look at the video on body language where you've looked at positive and negative body language. So positive body language is about smiling and nodding and back and a nice relaxed posture. Leaning in slightly to listen so it looks like you're paying attention with good eye contact, whereas language could be things like folding your arms and tapping your body parts where you look very distracted. You could be leaning your hand on the informal time, looking at the floor, sitting really slouched, even biting nails. If you have positive body language, it shows that you're listening, it shows that you're relaxed, and it shows that you're confident. It also shows what you're thinking, because if you've got a sad face, you've come across, whereas if you've got a smiley face, you come across as looking happy, and you can relate other behaviours to moods as well. Question 6, so it's the same as question 4 and 5, but this time we're looking at body language. So for positive body language, I'd like you to describe positive body language, so tell me what positive body language is in 3 sentences minimum, and then describe what customers make positive body language. On to question 7, the same thing again, however, the negative body language. Negative body language is your first part of your question, you're going to describe what negative body language is in 3 sentences minimum, and then for the second part, you're going to describe what customers may think about negative body language. On to your learning activity. If you can write on there for me today's date, customer survey. We've looked at communication in the office, and today you've learned. Then the next session we're looking at needs and expectations. That's tomorrow's date. So that fulfills your lesson today on communication and business administration, where we have looked at the following aims and objectives, communication methods and know when to use them, to know how to overcome barriers to communication, by positive and negative, to understand tone of voice, body language, speaking clearly, and how these can impact communication.